everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jesse Hubbard, and this is Sound Out. With me today is a man that probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway because that's what we do on the show. Another great Jesse we have in the house here. Jesse Leach. How you doing, my friend?
I'm well, thank you. How you doing, man?
I'm good, buddy. I want to talk about music, of course. I want to talk about mental health, which is something that's really important to both of us. I want to talk about the supernatural and spirituality and all that. But let's back up a little bit, and I want to talk about kind of like your upbringing and kind of where things all started for you. I think you've led a very interesting life. I guess we'll start there, right? Like your father was a preacher, a minister.
Son of a preacher man, yeah.
Yeah.
As far back as I can remember, which my memory kicks on around 4 years old. One of my first memories is moving into a really bad neighborhood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the 80s, a place called Germantown, which I'm not sure if it's gotten any better, but back in the 80s it was bad, really dangerous. We couldn't leave our little fenced-in yard, and if we did go anywhere, we would have to be escorted by someone in the community who, I'll just jump right into it, who's named Aaron. And my dad being a minister, it was interesting that the guy's name was, I'm sorry, not Aaron, Moses was his name.
Oh,
and he
wow.
was a pimp, and he lived next door to us, and he used to carry around a sawed-off shotgun underneath his trench coat. And Moses was the guy that would lead us to the train station, escort us back. So we had protection in this neighborhood because people were not stoked on the Flanders moving into this neighborhood. You know, we're like the sore thumb, the white people, the people that my dad just being a Bible thumping preacher. So you had people that didn't want us there, and then you had people that loved the fact that my dad was a minister and people would cater to him. And so it was interesting. My memory of it is different. I only learned these things as I got older. So for me, my childhood was pretty good because my parents did a great job of concealing those details from me, which now that I know, I look back on it, it's hysterical to me. You know, Uncle Moses was a pimp. And I remember seeing
the shotgun wielding pimp.
Yeah, and we had a voodoo priestess that lived next door to us that would dance naked in her backyard with huge dreadlocks. I remember looking out in the window and seeing that when I was a kid.
Wow.
Just weird little vivid memories. And her son was named Kilo after kilos of cocaine. Just a really interesting. And during this time, since my father was going to Bible school, they were able to put my brother and I into private school. So not only were we the white people in the neighborhood, but we were uniformed up private school kids. So my brother and I got a really good education. I was in private school until I was 11 years old, and we studied archery, Latin, like high education. So at least I did get that out of the raw deal of being a son of a preacher man. And part of that life too was traveling a lot. We didn't stay in any place too long, so I lived in a lot of places.
Almost like a military, like an army brat kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and you can ask most pastors' kids. It is sort of like a military brat.
Is it? Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the voodoo priestess. Was that something you were aware of it as a kid, or was it not until looking back you're like, oh, that's what that was?
I just knew her as the weird lady next door,
Yeah.
because my family would go out of their way to show face in the community. My mom would like make food for people and bring it over their house. I remember vividly going down to the main strip. So our house was on this street, and at the end of the street was the corner store, where everyone hung out. And actually, the first time I ever saw breakdancing in the 80s was on that corner store. And then on that strip where that corner store was the main drag, and there were homeless people everywhere. And I remember going down there with my mother, one occasion specifically, and passing out food, and my mom telling them about Jesus. So we were out there. We were in people's homes. We knew the neighborhood. They knew us. But my memory of it is definitely, 4 years old. I don't remember much, but I remember it being crazy. At night, there were, you could hear gunshots. You could hear people yelling. I remember asking my parents what the word yo meant. Yo! Because I would hear I would hear it all the time
Yeah.
out the window.
Yeah.
Yo. And I started getting in on the lingo and started to speak and say stuff like "say what," and people just got a kick out of it. These little private school white kids. But I will say this though, it truly, truly to this day influenced my taste in music, my love for comedy. African American culture raised me from a very impressionable age till we moved out of there. So from the age of like 4 to 7, I think 4 to 6, 7. Very impressionable years in my life. And I remember the food, the culture, the comedy, people just always having something uplifting to do in the community. Like, yeah, it's still to this day, it shaped me and made me feel very comfortable around African American culture. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, such a unique experience. Did you find yourself at any point, did you always embrace the faith and the religious aspect of your upbringing, or was there a period in your youth when you started to rebel from that, as most kids seem to do whenever they're surrounded by that?
Yeah, it was just ingrained to me. I mentioned the Flanders kids. My brother and I were the Flanders kids. Like, we were those kids that knew the Bible verses, would sing the song, and I would get picked on outside of our private school environment in the neighborhoods we lived in. I was picked on a lot. If I heard somebody swear, for example, you can't say that, like that was me up until a certain age.
Yeah.
But, when I started coming into my teen years, I'd say around 12, 13, you start to see outside of it a little bit. And it wasn't that I was ever anti, and I'm still not anti-Christian. I don't call myself a Christian anymore, but I was indoctrinated up until I'd say my 20s and 30s. I mean, I obviously had a rebelling phase in my teen years, but even when I was, going crazy, doing, experimenting with drugs and drinking and skateboarding and going to punk shows, I'd still have to go to church on Sundays. Throughout, my dad said, as long as you live under my roof, you will be in church on Sundays. So every Sunday I was in church. And I can talk about this now. We can get to it later. I actually had to go to church tripping on acid, like an inordinate amount of acid. My punishment when they found out, because I had taken 14 hits of Timothy Leary acid, unbeknownst to me.
Unbeknownst to you.
I thought it was 4 hits. Because I was, anyone who's done acid, you work your way up to dosages. So I was at the point where I was doing it enough where 4 hits of acid was like, we're having fun. It's not dangerous. But the asshole who sold it to me didn't tell me they were blotters. So there was 4 doses on each square. So that was the time when I actually woke my parents up and told them that thought I was going to die. Demons were coming out of the walls at me. So I can laugh about it now. At the time, it was terrifying. But my dad dragged me to church the next day, and I sat through a sermon that was aimed at me because he was preaching. And I just
demons out of you, boy.
Dude, I sat there crying and like looking at the carpet, and the carpet's like swirling up at me like snakes. I'll never forget it.
Oh my God.
I got sidetracked there, but yeah, I did rebel for sure.
No, we'll make we will always make time for a tripping in church story. I promise you.
But I will say this though, as much as I don't identify as a Christian specifically, because to me, it's the organization of religion, I think, that tends to have a narrow point of view, and I think you miss out on the beauty of the unknown. When you're a Christian, you're sort of shunned away from exploring other religions. You're shunned away from questioning too much. And the bottom line will be, it's because the Bible says. And at a certain point in my life, I was like, I don't accept that answer anymore. Then when I started traveling the world through music, that's when I really started to open my eyes up and spend time in places like mosques, Buddhist monasteries, hanging out around people who had various different beliefs and learning a lot about that stuff, and also dipping back into Native American culture and the belief of the Great Spirit and how the Spirit is in everything. And I identify a lot more with sort of that pagan-esque type belief. Like, I believe there's a God and a creator, a great spirit, and I'm comfortable leaving it at that. All the other details I think are personal, and I'm not one of those
Yeah.
people that would beat somebody over the head like I saw growing up. You know, people scaring people into becoming a Christian for fear of hellfire and brimstone. That's just something that never sat right with me.
I completely understand your perspective on that. I couldn't agree more. So much of religion is just essentially an interpretation from man, right?
Absolutely.
And it's just so flawed because of that. I think, I have a personal faith, and I like what you said there, because like it's a very personal thing. Like, I think it's important for people to discuss certain aspects of it, but uh, a lot of you see it a lot in Christianity, very very pushy, very very
Yeah.
pushy,
Yeah.
and and just really browbeat you with it, and it's like it's my way or the highway, and it's like hellfire, brimstone, the whole thing. So it's
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from with that for sure.
Yeah. For me, it's a personal thing, and the idea of scaring people into believing to save their souls just doesn't sit right with me. It's a long
Yeah,
sorted opinion, and again, it's opinion. And I just
sure.
want to let anyone listening now, because I know how this goes. I know people who are religious are probably shaking their heads, and it's a very emotional thing for people. I respect the ritual. I respect anybody who takes time to be grateful, to give praise to a God, and to try to do good for others. It's that stuff I will never not respect. I respect people's
Yeah,
beliefs in their religions. It's the negative stuff that I don't like. The hatred of people because they're different. And
yep,
look, they don't come out and say it, but there is hate preached in certain pulpits. There's hate preached in certain interpretations of scripture. And I've read the Bible. I've studied it. I've read it over and over again. And I had the blessing of having a man like my father who could read the original languages, who knows Greek, Latin, Hebrew, studied those. So I know how translations has changed. And I can tell you for sure the English version you're reading is not accurate. It's not. It gets lost in translation. On top of the fact that, once the Roman Empire got a hold of this religion, which was called the Way before it was called Christianity, the amount of control they put on it and the manipulation that happened because of that, it turned political. So when you have the start of Roman Catholicism, when the Roman Empire took over this religion, that's when things changed completely. And prior to that, you would have had a very different view of what Christianity was back then. It's changed a lot through the years. And that to me
that's
is
so
where the
interesting.
flaws are, because it turns political to control the masses. So yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
I agree with everything you're saying, man, and you know I know you said that some people may be listening, shaking their head or whatever, but I feel like your outlook is a beautiful one, and you essentially said that you find truth and you find beauty in all of the different iterations of spirituality and religion. And I think that's so important, and I wish more people felt that way, because you do see so much, especially in organized Christian religion, so
Yeah.
much of it's this way and this way only. You know what
And
I
I think
mean?
I
And
think too that what I think people don't realize too is that's American Christianity. There
yeah,
are
good
there
point.
are
Good point.
there are Eastern Christianities, Russian Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox, that I have found a lot of beauty in. There's a lot of reverence and respect, and I think that the East does it better, and we could learn a lot here in the United States from the way the Eastern Church is, the mystics. There's just such a reverence for God that they don't have to do that browbeating and that Bible thumping there. It's different there, for the most part.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. That is true. It's the Americanized version, as we tend
America.
to do with a lot of things. America, baby.
Yeah.
um, so uh, that's something that you had your rebellious years a little bit, as we all do or whatever, but you were still pretty involved in the teachings of the Bible and your parents and so on and so forth. At what point in your life did you really start getting into music, and more specifically, heavier music, metal and punk and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I was raised in a home of music. My dad played guitar in the 60s in a rock band, and he would also lead worship with the acoustic guitar, because I was raised Pentecostal. It was very, up until a certain point, Pentecostal, which was very intense form of Christianity. So music was always there, even from the praise music. And then my dad had a vinyl collection. I grew up wearing, the big can headphones. There's pictures of me in my rocking chair as a baby, listening to everything from gospel music to Simon and Garfunkel, the Beatles, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Joni Mitchell, all kinds of 60s stuff, the protest stuff. I was saying this the other day on an interview. If you go back and read the lyrics to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's records so far, it's revolutionary. There's messages there. And my father, even though he was very religious, was very much a product of the 60s, an ex-hippie, an ex-biker. He had his time.
Biker, huh?
Yeah.
Ex-hippie, ex-biker. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Yeah. He used to smuggle drugs over the Mexican border. He was in a gang. He lived a wild life. And I do believe him finding God did save his life. And I respect him so much for that, and for being the father he was and is today. But so music was always there. And then for me, the heavy part of it didn't come in until I started to discover it for myself. And that happened around 12, 13 years old. I started rubbing elbows with unbeknownst to me, I didn't really know they were punk kids who didn't really have, the mohawks and the chains. They just were skater kids, scruffy hair. At that age, you're growing your hair out, you're awkward, you don't really know who you are. I met these two kids, and I started dating this girl who was friends with them, and they made me mixtapes. That's what did it for me. It was back then you had the cassette tape with, you'd spend time with taking the vinyl down, putting it on, recording a song, and making these mixtapes. And I was hearing all this new music to me. Everything was new to me, because to me, all I knew at the time was like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains. Those bands were huge. Stone Temple Pilots. I loved all that shit. But
that was the stuff that was on the radio,
right?
What I mean? Yeah.
The stuff that made me feel like, oh shit. Not only have I never heard anything like this, but there's a whole community around this thing. Was Minor Threat, and it was all about the anger and the energy and the speed and the ferocity and the simplicity of it too. Because you could hear bands like Metallica and Anthrax. They were titans. They were untouchable, doing stuff that I couldn't imagine doing. And then Minor Threat opened that door of like, not only do I love it, the lyrics are there, it's angry, it's got something to say, but it was accessible. Power chords on a guitar. Yeah. So Minor Threat was the gateway to like, what is this fucking music? And it had such a hold on me, I became straight edge for about a year. Because I was just in that scene. You meet these people, they're vegetarian, they're taking care of themselves, they're not getting drunk, they're not getting high, they're have goals, they're positive. I loved that shit. And it really spoke to me with my Christian upbringing, like being chaste, being pure. And that stuck
what was this kind of the moment where you realized, like, I don't want to be straight edge anymore?
Haha.
Because that's tough, especially at a young age.
Yeah. So those two guys I was hanging out with that I started a band with, we had a band called Departure. And we sounded like a mixture of like, I don't know, I was trying to do a James Hetfield yell over Misfits meets like early Lemonheads, because I loved the Lemonheads. Most people don't know this, the Lemonheads used to be a punk band before, in the 90s, when they had Into Your Arms and all those pop hits. Their early shit is great. Hate Your Friends, Lick, those are great records, and they're punk. So I loved that shit too. So I was just hanging out with those dudes one day, and this guy Nathan was like, hey, my sister gave me this nug of weed, of marijuana. We should try it. And I remember all of us were straight edge at the time, and I don't remember what it was. We were just like, fuck it, what's the hype about? I'm like, I have no idea. It
Yeah.
smells cool. I've smelled it a bunch around my friends and people who weren't straight edge. Let's give it a
Yeah.
shot.
Yeah.
And I'll still remember that afternoon. It was the most fun I've had in a long time. We laid around just laughing about stupid shit. We ate some birthday cake that was left over from my friends, just munching on food, and food was better than I'd ever experienced it. And then listening to music was better than I ever experienced. I remember um, Biohazard and Onyx just came out with, the Judgment Night soundtrack was big then. And I remember hearing Slam with Onyx and Biohazard and just getting hyped and like wanting to know what other hardcore and punk there was outside of straight edge. So I started to really like, because of that weed, that was it. I became a total stoner at that point. Like, weed took away my anxiety. It calmed me down. It made me creative. It was my medicine. I didn't realize it then, but it really helped with my mental issues and everything I had going on, which I didn't know I had any back then. I didn't have the language for it, but weed was everything. And then from that point, it was like anything weed related I was into. So Murphy's Law had songs about smoking weed. Got into Murphy's Law. Bad Brains were Rastafarian. I got into the Bad Brains, The Clash. And then it was reggae music. And then I started to fall in love with Bob Marley and then Rastafarianism and reggae. So I was very easily influenced from going from straight edge into anything weed related and then 90s hip hop. Anything that had to do with smoking weed and blunts and 40s. That was the shift for me. It went from straight edge, punk rock to like, that mixture of hip hop, reggae, and ska, and like all that shit. That we just opened up those floodgates, not just for the lifestyle, but for the music too.
Yeah. It's funny. I literally just saw in I think it was your Instagram stories, something about like if you don't like Bob Marley, there's no way you can be in my inner circle or something like that.
Huge
just saw
influence.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
huge
yeah.
influence.
Did you see the newest movie about his life?
I've been holding out for the local art house cinema down the street is playing it, and I'm gonna go see it for sure. I've heard it's great, and I'm fascinated by it because I think there's a lot of details that people don't realize about Bob's life. He was not a perfect man, and I'm curious to see how much they divulge with his lifestyle. So yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I will.
Yeah, right on, man. Right on. I figure it's right up your alley then. Um, Talk a little bit about anxiety, and I'm going to get into that in a minute, because I think that's an important thing to talk about. And it very well, I think, kind of all kind of comes together with, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys formed Killswitch, and then around was it like '02, you stepped away from the band.
Yeah.
Right? I'd like to talk a little bit about that if you're okay with that.
Yeah, of course.
And just kind of, and I know you've talked about it before, and some people have heard the story, but we can touch on it a little bit about why that was necessary for you at that time, to step away, because you guys were firing on all cylinders essentially, and
We were, but I think a lot of people don't realize we were still a baby band. When I did leave,
yeah,
we were the opening act of a tour, so we weren't
fair
huge.
enough. Yeah.
But we did start to see, which gave me anxiety, people showing up early to meet us, people wanting autographs, like that kind of shit started to creep in, and it definitely didn't help my social anxiety, which I did have at the time, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't have a language for what I was going through in my head. And I think part of that too, now that we're talking about it, and I'm having a eureka moment as I speak, I had weaned off of drinking and weed at that point because I really wanted to preserve my voice. So I went from being a stoner and an occasional drinker to basically straight edge again on the road because I thought it would help my voice because I was having so much trouble with a lack of technique, just screaming my guts out every night. So after 3 shows or so, I would lose my voice. So not only was I dealing with sobriety and mental issues, but not having control of my instrument. And that was killing me. It was making me feel worthless. It was giving me anxiety on top of social anxiety. Like, oh my God, is my voice going to work today? That entire tour was hard for me. It was desperately hard. And I got to a point where I was suicidal. I was done. I thought, if I can't do this, what am I going to do with my life? I got nothing. Music is everything. It crushed my spirit. So I bailed and I disappeared. I just disappeared off the face of the earth for a couple months and tried to pick up the pieces of my life. And that was a very difficult time, but necessary, absolutely necessary for me as a human being. I think that's when I started to become a quote unquote man, when I learned how to pick myself up and get back to work, find some purpose. I was working 3 jobs back to back. I'd get up at 5 a.m. and work till 10 at night, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. I learned a lot about myself, and it was a blessing in disguise. And then the music wouldn't let me go. So I eventually got back into music, but with the tools that I was able to speak about having issues, because the band I was getting involved with called Seamless, those guys, they wanted to know what was going on with me. Like, why did I leave? So I started to talk about it then. Started to realize that I had anxiety, started to realize I dealt with depression and instability.
Was that a difficult thing to open up about it and to start talking about it? Initially?
It wasn't because I started to drink pretty heavily then too. And I discovered this whole side of myself where, that liquid courage thing they say, it opened me up and I became fun to be around. And I started to have fun for the first time in my life. I didn't take myself that seriously and I learned how to be a fun person. And I hate to say it, but alcohol did that for me for a while. And that became my crutch. And it didn't become a problem till later in life. But yeah, getting in Seamless, working my face off, figuring out who I was as a human and letting loose really helped and eventually put me back on tour again. And ironically, Seamless bought the old Killswitch Engage van. So when Killswitch moved to tour buses, they were selling that van and my band bought that van. So that same van that I suffered in, that I had depression and anxiety episodes and attacks where I would lay in the back of that thing wrapped up in blankets, like having panic attacks, I got back into that van and I learned how to tour again and learned how to love it in that same fucking van, which not a lot of people know about that.
That's huge. Like that's the kind of thing that I feel like you look back on your life and that's a big moment.
Yeah, it is.
It's
kind of ironic, right? It's really weird. I don't think a lot of people know that. Yeah. Getting back in that fucking van and doing it again, falling in love with touring this time around. Fell in love with it. I loved it. I didn't want to not be on tour. So it's because of that I'm able to do what I do today. It's because of that band Seamless that I learned how to get back on my feet and figure it out.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I don't know if I've shared that before. I don't know if a lot of people know that one. You might have the exclusive there.
Oh, we got the exclusive.
I think so.
Sound that exclusive. Boom. No, that's fascinating. That's just something that just, I hope everybody really thinks about what that means. You know what I mean? Because what that van represented and to conquer that beast, so to speak, I think is a special moment.
It really is. Wild. It's wild.
Yeah. So, this is all very interesting to me. I really appreciate you sharing that. I have had my struggles with anxiety and depression and all that as well. And it's something that I've always admired about you is your willingness to speak on these things and share these things. And I know you are a mental health advocate. And I think that it's important for someone in the public eye like yourself to share their stories, and it normalizes these stigmas that especially men face with being open and vulnerable about mental health. There's less and less of that stigma being attached to it. I think the idea of what masculinity is evolving and changing for the better because of that. But Thank you for just being so honest and open about it and raw about it.
Yeah, I can't not. It feels like it pulls on my heartstrings and it gives me a sense of purpose outside of the music. My lyrics have a lot to do with that as well, but
Sure.
just how I carry myself as a human being on a daily basis, I think it's important to be open to that conversation. And any opportunity I get or see where I could potentially help somebody, I do. I don't hesitate. I'll reach out to people via messages or texting. Set up phone calls with people if they need to talk. Um, it, the more you speak on it, the more clarity you can get. And I do believe we still have a far way to go. This conversation needs to continue. And you mentioned, the stigma attached to it with men. Absolutely. Things are changing, but absolutely there's so much room to grow. There's so much
Yeah.
more that needs to be
Sure.
said. And I say this a lot, and I'll continue to say, because I think people need to realize this, that you being vulnerable, you saying that you're not okay, you asking for help is strength. If you're one of those people that is a suck it up type person, man up, suck it up, no, that is weakness. That is you running away from your demons, you running away from your problems, and living a lie, essentially. And I say that's weakness. So anyone who does open up and says how they truly feel, breaks down in tears, talks about it publicly, that is fucking strength. I admire people like that. And that's the way to live. I mean, obviously, no one wants to hear someone weeping all the time. You would hope that you would have these breakdowns to be built up again to find strength, which I've done in my life. But we shouldn't shun people for being vulnerable and for having those breakdowns. They're necessary in order for you to grow, but you got to do the work. You can't stay stuck in this one state of mind where you're constantly in a dark place. You got to do the work, and that's different for everybody, but it has to be done. You got to do the work.
That's well said, man. That's very well said. I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 12 years old, and this was back in the early 90s. We're about the same age. We're just a couple years older than me. So like back then, nobody knew what the hell this shit was. They didn't know anything about it. It was all trial and error. And through the years, you get a kind of a better grasp with it. You live with it, and it's not as big of a deal. But then in recent years, pandemic and my father passing and all that, terrible shit happened all at the same time and started bubbling up again. And that is when you talk about doing the work. That is when I started with the exposure therapy, and which is, for those not aware, it's a simple thing. It's a pretty basic thing, but it's sitting with the discomfort of whatever it is that ails you, right? So like these intrusive thoughts and compulsive thoughts that were just debilitating, you just sit with it and you have to break through to the other side. And that was, Jesse, that was some of the hardest shit that I've ever had to do, man. It
Yeah, I
was
can't imagine.
so fucking hard. But it worked. I'm not perfect, never will be, and I still struggle. But man, things are better because of that, and it's hard, but like you said, you got to build yourself back up. And I mean, shit, man, if I can do it, anybody can do it,
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning too that, that type of stuff happens with guidance. That type of stuff happens because there are people out there who have studied the brain and how the brain functions, and asking for help and opening that door to receive information to have those conversations is the only way you will change. And make no mistake, those things don't leave us. Our mental disorders don't go away, but you are able to learn to live with them, to cope with them, and to live a more functional life. And that doesn't happen unless you speak and ask for help and accept help and therapy from people.
Yeah. You have to be. Yeah, you can't do it on your own. You just can't.
No, it's a fool's errand. It's lying to yourself, thinking you can do it. Because a lot of times people think they're progressing and they're not, and that's a dangerous thing to do.
Guilty. I've been there.
Yeah.
Guilty for sure, man. But you talked a little bit about your music, about how that's something and in your lyrics, you do deal with these topics, and obviously, that's a catharsis for you. It's almost therapeutic, it seems, and it obviously is for so many of your fans. Is this something that you are actively aware of when you're constructing these songs about how you consider the reaction or how they may help other people, or do you just write it pure from your heart and let the chips fall where they may?
Yeah, I think during the writing process, I don't think about my audience. I'm just trying to channel the pure emotion, and as well as, especially in this newest record coming out, channeling other people's stories, information that I've gathered from other people, because there's a lot of me on this record coming up, but I've also injected other people's stories and struggles as well, relate to them lyrically, but also write it in such a way where you as the listener can engage in put it to your own story, but that happens naturally. I feel like the only time I think about my audience is when it's done, which thank God this record has been done for a few weeks now. So I've been able to go on long drives and listen to it. And that's when the hairs on my arms stand up and I get teary eyed and I'm like, oh, that line. It's like, it's almost as if I'm a spectator. And I truly believe this, and this goes into my belief with God as well. If you're open and you're humble, you can be an instrument, right? So some of these songs I've written, yeah, they're my words. I actively wrote them down, but I am very open and I pray this. This is my mantra on a regular basis when I'm writing a record. Speak through me. I'm evoking what I believe is God or a spirit to come through my words, to use them for people to have therapy, to have clarity. It's very important to me. I'm actively doing that. I'm casting spells with my words. So now that I'm listening back on it, I'm like, wow, this is great. And it sounds funny because it's not me praising myself. It's just I'm fortunate enough to have this gift that's been given to me and to be able to work with people who are as talented as the guys in my band and as wise as someone like Adam D, who produces and helps me rearrange my words and lyrics and sounds, and he plays a huge role in that as well. So I have to give him a ton of credit as well too. But all of that is to say that once the album is done, the music's done, it is no longer ours. It's no longer mine. It's yours as the listener. And I think that's the beautiful thing about what we do as a band with Killswitch, or what I've done with Times of Grace, or any band really that I've been in. Once the music's done, the lyrics are written, it's no longer mine, it's yours.
And that's a beautiful thing. And that's to hear the way you talk about your excitement for it and going on the long drives and listening to it. Like, man, that's what we want out of our favorite musicians, to have that belief and that passion about what they're creating.
Yeah.
Because that just comes through in every facet, the album, the performance, and so on and so forth. I think that's huge. It's great to
Yeah.
hear,
That's what I would want to, musicians that I'm a fan of, they're obsessed with what they do. Obsessed. And I am too. And, going for those long drives and listening to it, it's quality control as well, which we've done a lot of on this record. And a lot of people will hear this as we start doing press for it. But this record, I wrote like 8 songs and we put them all in the trash. We completely rewrote so many songs because it just didn't either A, meet the standards of what we were trying to go for, or B, feel fresh enough. So I wasn't repeating myself. So this album put me through the fucking ringer to make sure that the stuff was fresh, relevant, and at a quality that we need to hold ourselves to, being a band that, the kind of legacy we've created, and being a band this long, you don't ever want to hear a band just put out a record that's
Right.
I don't, you can tell when bands do that. This album is not that at all. It almost destroyed me, put me through a severe depression, but I regret none of it. I regret none of it.
When's the album going to be out? When can we expect it?
We're waiting to hear the officials, but we still got to get it mixed and mastered. Artwork's done. I'm going to assume late summer, fall, probably fall, realistically. Right. But you will probably leak out a song here and there. We'll see. I'm excited, but good things take time, and I'm one of the people, we come from this generation, you can attest to that, where we're old school. We're not a band that's just going to put out a single or an EP and just going to, like this generation, no disrespect to anybody as an artist. If you can do that, amazing. If you can churn out music quick, turnarounds quick, that's awesome. But I'm just not that guy. I really need to sit and go over things and be very meticulous with it. So that's why it's taken 5-6 years now from album to this record. So yeah,
I'm
I
almost
couldn't be more
skeptical
happy.
when the music comes out too quick from an artist, right? If it's just like too quick, and I'm like, how passionate are you about this? Are you just like everything you create, you're just putting it out there, you know?
I gotta say that one band that did that back to back years ago was Deftones. They put out 2 records back to back that were phenomenal, and it was within
that's fair. That's
almost
fair.
like a 2-year, and I was like bullshit. And I listened to it was like I can't remember the name of the albums. It was Yodo Khan and the other one before that. But those albums are genius back to back. I'm like, fuck you.
There are exceptions to that rule, and the Deftones are an exception. I'm not like Frank Turner is also really good about that. Frank Turner puts out a lot of stuff frequently, and it's all really, really good.
Well, Frank's a genuine artist. That's why he can do that. He is, by all accounts, and everyone that I've known that's worked with him, he is a genuine artist.
Yeah, his stuff is always so good. So you touched a little bit about Times of Grace and Stoke the Fire, The Weapon, all these other projects that you're doing, right? So you've got so many creative outlets, it seems. Obviously, you put so much into this record that you guys just recorded with Killswitch Engage, and that's at the forefront of everything. But how do you juggle all of these projects? Is there a method to it?
I don't. That's the problem. I would say that Times of Grace and Killswitch destroyed The Weapon. The Weapon never even got to play a show. I just didn't have the time. I love that record, that EP. It's a 15-minute album. It's some of the most exciting shit I've ever done. But I let those dudes down. I know I did. I love them all dearly. But that project I didn't have the wherewithal. I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the time. I just could never make it work. So we eventually just disbanded because they got frustrated. And I don't blame them at all. I do not. So I've been very careful. I've had opportunities to do side projects. I've had opportunities to do other things. I can't juggle. I can't do it. Now that this Killswitch record is done, yes, I could do something, but I'm not going to involve other people anymore because I feel like I'm just going to let them down. Times of Grace went away just because the pandemic, number one, and number two, Killswitch, Killswitch started to write again. Right after that album came out, the Killswitch machine started up. So that record went by the wayside, and the only opportunity we would have had to tour on that, I had started to work on the Killswitch material. I couldn't go on tour while writing a record. I just couldn't. So I'm not good at juggling. I can't juggle projects. I've had a lot of them, but they've came and went. Empire Shall Fall is another one. That band to me was pure brilliance. If you listen to those, the album and the EP, like that's some of the most creative shit I've ever done. And those guys were on some other level, mixing jazz and like hip hop and reggae, and before djent was a genre, those guys were totally doing that. And that stuff lyrically too is next level. But again, I rejoined Killswitch, couldn't do it, couldn't do both. I tried doing in the cross of any projects, I start to get fatigued in my voice, and then it's like, what's more important, my career band or my project? And the project just goes away. That's why I've done a couple of them, and they just kind of came and went.
It's got to be when you've got something that is the level of Killswitch, this huge band, this big machine. There's probably I can only imagine how involved it probably is when you guys go out on tour, for example. Obviously that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
But I know you essentially just said that you go into some of these with the intention of it being a longer thing than what it is, but are they creatively fulfilling? Do you get sort of scratch that itch by doing some of these other projects that you've done?
Yeah. And
is it important for you to do that, I guess is what I'm asking now.
Absolutely. And That's why I write a lot of stuff on my own. Like I've got enough material. I could put together a solo thing for sure. And I constantly write. I mean, just last night I was in a creative state of mind and I got on the piano and I played piano for 45 minutes. And my fiance Purple was like, what was that? I'm like, I don't know. Did you record that? No, I just play. And most of my stuff that I've done on my own that just goes into the air, that's art. I just need to do it. At some point I would love to capture that, but I haven't had the wherewithal. But now that the Killswitch record is done and I got nothing on my plate, I'm starting to really get into the idea of doing something solo. But the problem I'm having is I just don't know what to do with it because I love so many different styles of music and I create everything from trip hop and drum and bass to reggae to punk to I don't know, stoner rock. Like I can play and program and do all those things. I just don't know how to channel it into something that would make sense to somebody. So I'm still struggling with that. It would blow
everybody's mind if you did a ska record.
I would love to do. Are you kidding me? I'd love to do a ska record.
I'm sure it'd be great. It would catch a lot of people off guard, I'm sure.
I mean, Operation Ivy to this day is probably one of my top 5, top 10 bands of all time. I know every single lyric to that record. That record to me, I mean, Energy, the whole that there's nothing. You can't touch that shit. Yeah. But I don't know I couldn't stick with one genre. I would be like, I would want to put something else in there. You know, there's a band called Interterrestrials, I think, that does it really well. They do like D-beat punk, like hardcore punk mixed with reggae and ska, and they pull it off. So any fans out there who are into ska and like D-beat punk, check out the Interterrestrials. They're a small indie band from England. They've been around for 20 years. They don't really tour. They play pubs and like squats. But they've put out some incredible music, dude. Incredible music. So good.
Shout out to those guys. How rad would it be, though, if you just did an album, every song was a different style?
Every single one. I could do that.
That'd be crazy, man. That'd be so cool.
I just don't know. Maybe you're onto something there. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know.
But that's where my brain is. You know, when you talk about like brain stuff and issues, like my attention span, I'm like, oh, let's do this style. That's kind of how my brain is. Like I love so many different styles of music. I'd love to put out a folk record. I'd love to put out a death metal. I would love to do some like gothic death metal, like, I don't know.
Man, I would love to hear all of these. I'd be very, very interested to see how you approach some of these different styles. I know people.
Maybe that's the angle to do like a mixtape. There was at one point during the MySpace days where I did this thing called heavy metal mixtape, and the idea was you get a mixtape from somebody and it's all different. So I had musicians sending me demos and I would sing over them and put them up on MySpace. And there was a time where I did a metal song, I did a punk song, I did a grindcore song. I might have done some hip hop, trip hop. I don't remember, but maybe you're onto something. Cool, maybe I do that again.
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, maybe. I think I would be into it. I know a lot of people would. I'm just saying.
Never know.
You never know. So I mentioned Stoke the Fire, which is the fantastic podcast you do with Matt Stocks. You guys have been a little quiet on that front. Are we still moving forward with new episodes in the future just because everybody's been so busy? A little pause?
Yeah, Matt and I love each other, and I could see us doing that again at some point. But life between me making this record and touring as much as I have, initially it was me that was like, I can't handle as much. And then Matt got super busy as well and started to travel, spent time in Australia, and now he's on tour. Like he's pretty much just been absolutely nonstop. Yeah, so for him and I, between like DJing and doing cruises, and now he's doing a monster truck thing, which it's nuts. He's a madman, but he's traveling the world. So it's really difficult to nail down not only our schedules with the time difference, but to put a guest in there as well. We just haven't had the time. I mean, we used to talk constantly. I'm actually going to be catching up with him after this podcast, but it's really difficult for our schedules to sync. So as of right now, I don't have an answer for you. We're not broken up. It's not over, but I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know when we'll be able to have time to do that again. Because the moment, after I get married, which will happen in August, 5 days later, the world tour starts. We're jumping on a tour with Iron Maiden heading to Australia, New Zealand, and then we're already talking about headlining in Europe, and like the album will be out, and then my life will be very busy again. So it's to be seen.
Not a
But
lot of
I
time to do podcast
no, but
episodes.
I
Yeah.
I will say this: I'm super proud of what we've accomplished so far, and I do envision it picking up at some point in the future, but I don't know. But
Yeah.
as of now, if you're interested, go back and check out Stoke the Fire. We've got some really interesting stuff, including yourself as a guest. And I
Yeah.
love what we did, man. So we'll see.
Yeah, it was absolutely a great show. It was I I love the show. You guys had so many interesting guests on. And it was important. I think the things that you guys talked about on there, like just you had interesting guests talking about heavy things and sometimes lighthearted things. Like you'd have some knucklehead like this guy right here come on and just talk about like bartending and cocktails and shit. But
Which is great.
but a lot of like a lot of really important stuff. And we, you did that uh, awesome rap party in New York, and you brought so many of the guests together, and it was really fun. And we all got a chance to hang out and spend some time together. Somebody who quite a few people from that night I've stayed in touch with and forged these awesome relationships with, like Chris and Father Maximos and so many other people, and it's been absolutely stayed in touch with Vinny, like we
Yes.
text every now and again, you know what I mean? But Father Maximos in particular is somebody that I've had on the show. I find to be such an interesting man, Russian Orthodox priest that I first was first found out about from watching you guys' show or listening to the show, and he has dealt so much with the supernatural, with the Ed and Lorraine Warren, the people behind Amityville Horror, all of these things. I found that so fascinating listening to that episode and then having him speak at the show. And you talked about a lot of stuff. You have had some experiences with the supernatural, and something that I remember you saying, and I want to hear your thoughts a little bit more in depth on it here before I let you go. But I remember you being so adamant. I've repeated this to other people, so adamant about not messing with that shit. You're like,
Yeah.
do not mess with Ouija boards and seances. So that long-winded spiel to get to the point of why is it so important for you to tell people, do not mess with this stuff. What
Yeah.
happened that is such an important message for you?
Yeah. Just to backtrack real quick, it's The Conjuring. I don't think it was Amityville Horror. I think it was The Conjuring and Annabelle. Did they do Amityville?
So Amityville, that was they weren't portrayed in that movie, but they are the people who
no shit.
investigated that. The real life people.
I didn't know that.
Right?
You just
So Ed Lorraine Warren.
No
Ed
shit.
Lorraine Warren.
Legends.
I'm a bit of a nerd about this kind of stuff. So they were portrayed in The Conjuring and Annabelle, and then it was spin off of The Nun. But Ed and Lorraine Warren were the people, real life, who investigated the Amityville haunting out in Long Island.
I didn't know that, or maybe I did and forgot that. But wow, that's cool.
You probably knew because they've done a lot of heavy hitter stuff. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
I think that was the one that really kind of brought them to like a national fame level. People knowing about them.
People saw they were special. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Cool. Learn something new. I'm gonna research that. I love this. All right. So and that being said, researching it and learning about this stuff is different than dabbling in it and getting your hands dirty with this stuff. And I have friends that are able to do that kind of stuff and be safe. But there's a lot of work involved around that, cleansing and preparing. And there are some people that have gifts that can deal with the spirit world and be okay for the most part. You mentioned Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine was one of those people that had special abilities, but it does affect you. So if you're not one of those people that can do it and is able to sort of protect yourself, do not get involved with dark forces. And I say that from experience. Growing up, my father being a minister, when you deal with spiritual energies, when you're a person that is trying to spread a positive spiritual message, you become a target. And I've become a target in my life. Still am at times. I've actually had to talk to Father Maximus in the past couple of years because of an attack that I experienced. But I find it a lot, again, when you're trying to do good things, you're liable to be attacked and a target for darkness. And I'm one of those people that I don't feel any foolishness or could care less if you don't believe what I'm saying, because I know for a fact that there are spirits. The spirit world is real. I grew up with it. I lived in a haunted house. I've seen entities. I've experienced feelings. I've seen people getting taken over by entities. I've heard people speak in languages that they didn't know, Latin, Aramaic, in voices that were not their own. I've experienced those things as a young man, and being
We're
around.
talking, I mean, that's essentially demonic possession.
Right.
Is what that means to me.
Or repression, or there's different terms. You can be taken over briefly and it doesn't stay with you. But yeah, if you're living a certain type of life, or if you're dabbling in these spiritual practices that are dark, you open portals. You open yourself up to these entities latching onto you and manipulating you and affecting you in various ways. I've experienced it personally, and I've seen it firsthand, and it is something that will change your life when you go through it. And people who are like attracted to it think it's cool, and it's cool until something real happens to you and you come face to face with something, or it ruins your life. The whole idea of being cursed, that isn't just folklore. People can actually be cursed, and what that means is you have something that's attached to you that is feeding off of your darkness, that is feeding off your insecurities, that will manipulate you and continue to keep you down, because that negative energy that you're giving off, demonic entities feed on that. So yeah,
I have she has since passed, but I had a great aunt that lived to be 107 years old. Italian, Josephine Bacchi, and the day she died, she said that she was cursed at one point in her life. She was engaged to be married. They called off the engagement, and her to-be mother-in-law put a curse on her, and where she would have all of a sudden these horrible migraine headaches, and she had to go to a priest to put a blessing on her and to essentially relieve the curse, and it went away. And like in the Italian part of my family, she would go around, put salt in all the corners of the houses, to ward off the evil spirits, and you see a lot of that kind of stuff. It's very fascinating, but I don't mess with it.
Yeah, people scoff at that type of stuff, but I sage my house. I do prayers. I try to do it maybe once a month. I should probably do it more. But it's all about your intention. It's all about where your mind is and where your spirit is and the energy you give off. If you're living a very intentional life, there's power in that. People will scoff at, because people love to scoff at other people's beliefs. There's the people who are very sort of anti anything that has to do with the spirit world because they've never experienced it. They don't believe in it. They're one of those people who, like, if you don't see it, then it's not real. I get that. I understand. I don't want to argue with people like that at all. But that being said, there's power behind intention. There's power behind prayer. If you're speaking something, we call it spells. Like, there's different words for it. But if you're waking up every morning and you're intending to do something, whether that be to spread kindness, to live in abundance, to lead with love in your life, those things are powerful. And that's why people of faith do this thing called praying, where you sit and you put your mind and your focus, you meditate on something that is positive, or something you need help with, or a person that's going through something, and you're putting that energy out into the world, that is real. It is absolutely real. Even on a scientific level, the exchange of energy is real. So if you practice that on a regular basis, your life can change. So people who are cursed, that's someone actively putting negative things onto you. The only way to combat that is to be a spiritual warrior and to combat that with your energy. So every morning I wake up, before I touch my phone, before I do anything, I stay within my body and I keep my eyes closed and I pray every morning. First thing I say is gratitude. I thank God for all the things that God has provided me with. Then I go on to list family members or certain people that are going through things, and I ask for guidance and help for them. And then I ask for things for myself, and then I end it with gratitude again. I do that almost every morning. And that's changed my life. It's changed my life completely. And call it what you will. It is real. There's power in that stuff.
100%. 100%. I wanted to ask you about the haunted house real quick. Was that something that you lived in? Was that in your childhood with your father? Or was that in adulthood?
No. So, well, kind of straddled both, but
Yeah.
my grandparents lived in this house. It was built in the 1920s in Cranston, Rhode Island. And it was shifted over when they built Route 95 to go through there. The house was in the way, so they actually uprooted it and moved it to another plot of land. Just a little backstory. So the house has been in existence 1920. My grandparents lived there. My father was raised there with my two aunts. And then when my grandmother passed, which is a supernatural story in itself, she passed in that front room of that house. And then when my grandfather moved down to Florida, my parents took over that house. We lived in there from when I was in 7th grade through high school. My parents left and gave me the house to take care of. I lived in it for about 10 years or so. So into my 20s. So from the age of like 12 to, I don't know, 20, late 20s, I was living there. Almost uninterrupted. With a few, I'd go and live for a year here with friends here, but I eventually would come back to this house and take it over. And that's when the worst of it. So in my childhood, I do remember odd things here and there. But when my father left, who I think was probably protecting us with his energy and his prayers and his power, because my parents are very powerful spiritual people, when they left, that's when all hell broke loose. That's when
opened the floodgates.
That's when that shit turned into a demonic place to live. It was dark and fucked up.
Wow. And was that sort of the first time in your life when you really kind of dealt with the supernatural, demonic?
No, I had seen it in my childhood.
Yeah.
I'd seen people, casting out in demons and speaking in tongues and people having hands laid on them and convulsing. I grew up around that stuff. So I did.
Fair enough, I guess, with your father being a preacher, yeah.
Yeah, I was exposed to it. And I do remember seeing ghosts as a little kid, experiencing that stuff. And my brother and I, corroborating stories and seeing the same things in the same areas. So we were always surrounded by spiritual energy, but it didn't get really dark, like scared the shit out of me dark, until I lived alone in that house with other people. And that's when I saw demonic things that were around me. That's when I experienced my ex waking up in the middle of the night, sitting up straight, speaking in a very dark tone of voice that was not hers, in Latin, while a black cloud hovered over our bed, and I was paralyzed with fear. That's just one of the many incidents that I experienced in that house. And there was one where we had a huge party. It was New Year's Eve. It's probably about 100 people packed into this house. We had, hip hop artists, we had poetry, we had bands play. It was like this huge celebration. And we're in the front living room area of this house, and an entire room full of people experienced a disembodied voice. We all heard it. And people left. People like there were some people that never came back to my house after that. We
Yeah, I
all
don't think I
sat in
would
this
either.
room
It's like, we'll hang
and
out somewhere else, man.
yeah, we collectively all heard this voice that I had been hearing. It's to me, it was like, sorry guys, yeah, that's like, to me, it was like, I know this is the shit I live with, and everyone was like, what the fuck was that, dude? So yeah,
Wow.
it runs the gamut. The attic and the basement were the main places where the activity would happen, and the attic nobody would go in. I had to go up there every once in a while to get stuff, but near the windows were piles of black flies, like just an inordinate amount of black flies near these windows. And anyone who studies and knows about demonology, if you're seeing and experiencing a plague-like amount of black flies, there's a demonic spirit nearby. Doors would slam, ceiling fans would spin and stop, keys would jingle, people would hear laughter and whisper, people would hear their names called, people would get their shirts and pants tugged on. Unfortunately, the people that would live in the basement, because we had a room, we had 6 people living there at one point, just like an artist commune. I didn't charge people a lot of rent. We just had people would just come in and out of the place at all times, but there was always somebody living in the basement, and they wouldn't last long ever. And people would just keep leaving, and there's people I haven't spoken to since that abruptly left and never talked to me ever again. And I eventually had somebody that I saw out and about at a bar, and I was like, yo, why did you leave? You didn't leave a note. Like, we're all worried about you. And he pulled me aside and sat me down and was like, here's the deal. There's something fucking demonic in that basement. And it scared he was in tears, scared the absolute shit out of me. And I needed to get away. Backed up by another person who left. And this girl lived in our basement, and she was writing a language I didn't recognize. She had notebooks full of this weird language, and she felt cursed, and she had something breathing down her neck, and she was hearing things. She got really sick, and she had to leave. Like, that house just affected so many people. And this is the tip of the iceberg. This is just the tip of the iceberg of shit that I experienced in that house.
You stayed though. You stayed for so long.
I had to stay. It was my house. I had to, man.
Somebody went sell a haunted house.
Yeah, I was there until the bitter end. And shit used to happen to me all the time. Anyone who knows, I hate to say, you just learn to live with it. Like, the shit doesn't scare you as much when it happens to you enough. You just start to...
Yeah, I mean, you almost just get conditioned to get used to it. I guess. Yeah. I don't know that I would, but I probably would just dip as well. Be like, see ya.
Well, since I left that house, my life's been pretty damn good. Like, the house I live in now.
I was going to ask you, yeah.
The house I live in now, we've had a few things here and there, minor things, like the TV turning on, which you could explain electronically, like nothing that was like, fuck, that's scary. It was like poltergeisty things that you probably could explain away from a scientific level, like lights flickering, like little things like that. Nothing where I'm like, fuck, there's something scary is happening right now. So this house has been, thankfully, very peaceful for the past 5 years. Happy about that.
And then if something happens, you got kind of like, Father Maximus.
I'll call Father Maximus. Yeah, be like, yo,
speed dial.
He's only 2 hours away from me. Come. He even offered to come bless the house when I was dealing with something, but it wasn't the house. It was attached to me, which is a whole other story.
Which is what he believes. Father Maximus.
Yeah.
I don't mean to. I want to hear your story, but like Father Maximus, he believes that they attached people, not homes, is what he told me. Which is fascinating.
I have one that I have has come and gone. I don't know if it's the same one. There's a school of thought. You can look this up. They're called familiar spirits. There's a school of thought that everybody has a demon assigned to them, and that demon knows your lineage. They know your addictions. They know your weaknesses. They know how to prey on you, and they will subtly dismantle you from the inside out. And I thought I was rid of mine until a few incidences. I'm not going to get into detail because I'm not proud of the shit that went down, but violent tendencies came out when I was drunk. Let's just say that. I saw a side of me that I don't remember that people witnessed, were like, that was dark. that was fucking weird. And because of that, it really made me pump the brakes with my drinking. I still enjoy drinking to moderation, but, you know, blackout drunk me, there's something that comes out. I'm sure other people can attest to this. You know, that's why they call it spirits. You leave yourself and something can come in and take hold, or it's a part of you that stays hidden. So I've dealt with that all my life here and there. And the most recent incident was a huge wake-up call to me. And Father Maximus was right there. He wrote me a letter. He was like, whatever you need. But his letter alone was like, gave me the tools I needed to just sort of figure out my situation. And a part of that was just really not boozing the way that I was at that time. So I tend not to do shots and any of that shit anymore. I'm a gentleman drinker now.
Gentleman, a classy drinker.
Yeah, but that made me do some inner work. I think that happened for a reason, for me to sort of go, why is this frustrated, angry side of me come out where I exploded on people I love? Why did that happen? The shit I said was like, wow, that I said that? What the fuck? So it really made me sort of do some inner work. And I believe it happened for a reason. And it really made me a better person. And I feel a lot more in control and a lot more confident with who I am because of that. It helped me address some issues. It helped me address some issues I was having, communicate them instead of hold on to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, man. This is such a great conversation. Such a great conversation, dude.
I really enjoyed this. It's just what I do.
Yeah, man. I mean, hey, we'll you know, I'm about ready to wrap up season 1 of the show here. We'll definitely have you back and talk more about just anything and everything, man. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, man. Same. It's nice just to verbally vomit and talk.
Yeah.
I often find with conversations like this, you don't realize it till you're away from the conversation and you process it. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Or I'll discover stuff about myself from something that I've said. When you're just in a good conversation and it's flowing, it's like when you sit with it after or you re-listen to it, you're like, oh shit, that was interesting that I said that.
Yeah, no, totally, 100%. And what's really cool for me, it's nice to catch up with you, but it's really nice. Like so many people know about your music, right? Everybody knows about Killswitch Engage and what you do with them. I really appreciate you talking about, like I said earlier, mental health, talking about your upbringing, and talking about these experiences with the supernatural. I think that's probably some stuff that maybe people watching this will be like, wow, that was really something that, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I've also had experiences with something else in the woods too that I don't talk about. But that can be for another episode. I've really never talked about that.
I was like, is that Bigfoot? Amazing, man. We can do a whole nother show about Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, aliens. I love all that kind of shit. I'm from Jersey, so the Jersey Devil's a big one. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I'm not too terribly far from where the Mothman was spotted in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Love all that shit.
Yeah. I've had my experiences for sure.
Right on, man. Right on, dude. Well, listen, man, give my best to your lovely fiance. Give my best to Matt. Everybody, unless you're living under a rock, you're going to find out about the new tour, the new album, all that stuff when it's ready to drop. Jesse Leach, my man, it's been a pleasure. Thank you once again. Yeah, brother. And thanks so much to everybody for listening. This has been a great episode of Sound Out. Always good to talk to a fellow Jesse. Thanks again to everybody. Until next time, this is Sound Out.
Hell yeah.